Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show. I am beyond delighted to have Dr. Ellen Vora on with us today. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for spending time with us to talk about something that is so important. That's basically how to have the healthiest emotional experience as a fertility patient. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? It shouldn't, though. So I want to tell our listeners more about you. Dr. Ellen Vora is a holistic psychiatrist, acupuncturist, and yoga teacher. Wow. She takes a functional medicine approach to mental health, considering the whole person and addressing imbalance at the root. She received her BA from Yale University and her medical degree from Columbia, and she's board certified in psychiatry and integrative holistic medicine. She lives in New York City with her husband and daughter, and she's the author of The Anatomy of Anxiety. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you come on, and it's kind of strange to say, to talk about anxiety. Like, who is excited to talk about that? But the thing is, we need to talk about it because so many people are experiencing it now more than ever. And I know you have a lot to share with us, but I would love to hear more from you about what drew you to psychology, psychiatry, and to working with people who have anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I actually am excited to talk about anxiety, and for two main reasons. And the first is it's just such a big problem. We need to be talking about it. It was already a big problem, and then the pandemic, and it feels like who among us is not in some way subjectively touching in with anxiety. But then the other reason I like talking about it and focusing on it is that there's actually a lot of low-hanging fruit with anxiety, and people struggle and suffer so much. And there's actually a lot that we can do. So I sort of feel like I salivate at the opportunity to support somebody with their anxiety because I like to relieve human suffering and people can feel better quickly.
I love that you say that because I guess that's how you can describe how, like this morning I was doing an ultrasound on someone and I'm like, have you ever seen a doctor this excited to see your eggs? And I swear it's almost like you're right, like salivating at like these beautiful eggs. So I can totally relate at your, I can relate to your passion about what you do. So you talk about this paradigm shift in your book, and it's something called anxiety as a neck up problem. Can you just talk to us more about what that means and what is really going on with anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, that's the paradigm that we were both trained with, is the way that we think about mental health is just limited to what's the neck up, just the confines of the cranium. And we're thinking about brain chemistry. We think about mental health as a genetic chemical imbalance. And there's validity to that theory, absolutely. But it is not the whole story. And there are multiple determinants of our mental health, and some of them genetic, some of them epigenetic, and some of them just environmental in our day-to-day lives. Not to mention the fact that as human beings, we have certain psychospiritual needs that impact our mental health. And so I like this view of panning out further than just thinking about brain chemistry, because that's the part we can't do a whole lot about. We can take medication to support that. Certain therapy modalities can be supportive of our brain chemistry. But at the very end of the day, it's somewhat of a destiny. And I prefer to focus on what we can change. So by focusing on how the physical body impacts our mental health, how our psychospiritual needs impact our mental health, that's a much more empowering and hopeful view. It's basically saying, okay, you're struggling, but there's something we can do about that.
Oh, I love that. And what are the things that you can do about that as far as handling the anxiety?
Yeah. So basically, the thought that went through my head is like, well, can I explain it more concisely than 270 pages? But I'm going to try.
Right? I was going to say, aside from getting your book, The Anatomy of Anxiety, which I think everyone should get, I love it, but yes.
But I will try to say it in less than 10 hours. So I think that basically it starts by first acknowledging that our physical body impacts our mental health. So we can really even just start walking around and repeating to ourselves, like, physical health is mental health. Mental health is physical health. Our brain is a physical piece of flesh in our body like anything else. If something is going on in the physical body, it's impacting our brain. And some of those chemical imbalances that we're so focused on are actually a downstream effect of some state of imbalance happening elsewhere. And so when our body's inflamed, when our blood sugar is crashing, if we have subtle micronutrient deficiencies, if something is off with the health of our digestive tract, if something's off with our thyroid, all of this is going to impact our brain and it will impact how we feel. And so these are some of the areas we can start. And a lot of these interventions, they are themselves relatively straightforward. Like, a big area of my practice, or my focus in my practice, is on sleep quality. Many of us, whether it's a matter of habits or it's something a little bit more out of our control, like sleep apnea, a lot of us are not getting adequate quantity or quality of sleep. So I spend an entire chapter just helping people troubleshoot how can they actually successfully, realistically get the right amount of sleep. And that alone is, it's interesting how I've had patients in my practice over the years where every once in a while there's a silver bullet. Not often, but sometimes I just fix somebody's sleep. And that actually has this ramification impact on the rest of their mental health. And really, so much of what was considered a lifelong diagnosis was really just how chronic sleep deprivation was showing up for them.
I mean, I definitely notice when I don't sleep. I mean, I don't sleep very much, maybe 40 minutes a night. No, I'm just kidding. But like, there's a threshold that I start to feel really anxious, and I know it's because of my sleep. And I started wearing the Aura ring maybe like 3 months ago, and I wish it would actually make me sleep more, but it doesn't. It just tells me how little I'm sleeping. So I'm still trying to do better, but I totally agree with you. So there's this concept that you bring up in your book that I actually hadn't heard of before. There's this concept of false anxiety and true anxiety. Can you tell us what that is?
I mean, it's a concept I more or less made up, but it's based on the work of a woman named Julia Ross, who wrote a book called The Mood Cure, where she defined this concept of a false mood. She's like, we have our real moods. That's when something happened and we're in a mood as a result. You've had a loss and you're grieving, is a classic example. But then we also have our false moods. And those are those times when, seemingly out of nowhere, we're suddenly irritable or anxious or sad or angry. And our brain is always all too happy to swoop in with a story, because that's what our brains do. They're meaning makers. They're happy to tell us, like, well, I'm anxious right now. It must be because of that email that I got from my boss that suggests that I'm a little bit underperforming at work. So we'll swoop in with a story to explain the sensations. But in that moment, if we could omnisciently look under the hood of the body, what we would see is that there's some state of imbalance happening. Maybe you're hungry, your blood sugar is crashing, maybe you didn't get good sleep the night before, maybe you are due for a dose of a psychiatric medication, which can sort of, put your body in the pharmacologic nadir, which can create, in my opinion, a form of a false mood. And so there are these states of physical imbalance that trip our body typically into a stress response that tracks up to the brain. Our brain feels the stress response and says, I'm anxious because of my job, my relationship, and the world is barreling towards certain destruction. And I'm not here to invalidate any of our very real concerns. The stories that we tell ourselves have a basis in truth. But in that moment, the cause of our anxiety is physical. And that's nice because there's something we can do about that. Doesn't change the fact that we still have problems, but we can then handle those problems from a place of calm and resilience, and everything feels a lot more manageable.
And then how do we manage that false anxiety? What kind of tips would you share with us so that we could do that, so that those small changes don't really impact our mental health?
Yeah, so I break it down into several different areas. As we mentioned before, sleep is a big one. I love to fix people's sleep and just get them getting solid night's sleep on a consistent basis. And then everything in life feels a little easier. Everything in the body works a little bit better as well. Nutrition is a big one. And that is such a big topic. And if we sort of lived in simpler, more straightforward times, we could say that the only goals with our food are to nourish our body and to not inflame us. And even that alone is a pretty tall order with our modern food landscape, with processed foods. and a lot of very nutritionally bankrupt foods. So it's hard to actually nourish ourselves, and it's hard to not be inflamed from our foods. But that's not even everything that we're up against with food, because we also live in this tension of kind of the pressures of diet culture, and some people take on an excessive approach to healthy eating, which kind of tips into a form of an eating disorder called orthorexia, or almost an obsessiveness with eating the right way. And so, and then, sometimes we sort of run the other way. And as one of my colleagues put it, she rebelled against toxic diet culture and then just started eating like a teenager for a decade. And that's not a solution either. So we really want to nourish ourselves, but not for any of the reasons the world is pressuring us to. It's really not to lose weight or for the patriarchal male gaze or what's the right number to be on a scale. It's not any of these reasons. It's as an act of self-love. And I focus a lot on technology, our relationship with our phones. There is so much about how that's impacting our anxiety levels. But I would say one central issue is that we're living in the attention economy. And our attention at this point is the commodity being competed for by very smart companies. And they've done their homework. They know their neuroscience and their behavioral psychology. And they know that if they give us a dose of uncertainty, fear, doubt, controversy, we'll rubberneck, we'll give an increasingly large share of our attention. They'll get more clicks and more ad revenue, but our mental health is often the collateral damage. And so when we're just being manipulated by our technology, we can just feel strung out. We don't sleep well. We fall into those pits of compare and despair and relational aggression. And we don't actually scratch that itch of real social connection. And so there's a lot about how do we realistically set boundaries with our technology so that we can still live in this world, but preserve our connection to real community and to good sleep.
Beautifully. So well said. I could sit here and listen to you for hours. I'm learning so much. This is fabulous. Wow. So, I mean, I think everything that you're saying is very powerful for people, just anyone, no matter what the diagnosis is that you're dealing with as it relates to your anxiety. And so many of my patients are obviously struggling with having a baby, and they're going with fertility treatment, and being in fertility treatment can be so stressful. So can you share any tips that you have for fertility patients to lower their anxiety?
I think, in a perfect world, all practitioners that they're working with are like you and kind of bring humanity to this work. And I think often, if I'm really being honest, a big part of how people struggle is in the interpersonal dynamics of going through the process. It's on top of everything else that's hard about it. And I think that there is a tension that exists between wanting to do everything we can to support our bodies and to help with the success, and then to not feel so responsible, because that invites this feeling of, first of all, it can just drive us crazy to be running around going to every acupuncture appointment and meal prepping and feeling like, okay, this is all on me. But then it invites in a feeling of that we failed if it doesn't work, and that we didn't do enough, or that we did something wrong. And I really just, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, probably your whole audience just prays for less shame, less self-blame in the entire, what I would call the sort of the psychospiritual journey of childbearing. And I think that I have a big perspective on how to support our bodies. Well, taking the false mood view, I think that as I've witnessed patients of mine, friends of mine going through fertility treatments, I think we have to be a little bit more cognizant of the fact that hormones, taking any kind of exogenous hormones, can impact our moods. And I'll see a lot of sort of swiping me away with that. So people being like, I know, but I can handle it. I'm okay. This is hard. It's stressful, but I'm okay. And then you see someone feel really dark, and they're like, well, I'm feeling dark because of how it's going or because of how it went. And yes, and the hormones are impacting the mood. And I just always want cognizance around this so that we can at least identify that and take the littlest bit of charge out of those mood states and say, this is challenging. And we don't invalidate that it's challenging, but also the hormones are almost doubling down on the mood and it's just making it harder. And I think there's power in being able to identify that.
Yeah, that's so powerful because I always tell my patients, these are the symptoms that you're going to feel at this period of time during treatment and in this period of time. And moodiness, anxiety, like severe PMS, I always bring that up and I say, if you're feeling really snarky, just blame it on me. It's totally my fault. I'm the one that caused it. And it's because of the hormones. It's not you. So just give yourself a little bit of grace and love yourself extra and realize that this will pass. The hormones will come out of your system and you're going to feel better again. So I'm glad that you brought that up too. The other thing I tell my patients is to channel a what's the word? A superhero, kind of think of a superhero and kind of just, if you, that saying, if you believe it, you can achieve it. But there's something that you brought up in your book about how true anxiety can actually be a superpower. So can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I start with the false anxiety. That's the low hanging fruit. And it's like, let's just eliminate all this unnecessary suffering. It doesn't serve us. It's not our deep inner truth. Being sensitive to caffeine or chronically sleep deprived or sort of our nervous system jacked up from our phones or we're inflamed, the anxiety that all of that causes is not helping anybody. And so within reason, whatever is accessible, you basically identify what's causing imbalance, address it, walk away from that aspect of anxiety in your life. But that does not eliminate all anxiety. And often what happens is when someone gets really clear and removes a lot of their false anxiety, it clears the air and it reveals what's behind that, which is our true anxiety, which is not something that I think we should be pathologizing. And it's not something that we could decaf coffee or gluten-free our way out of. It's our inner compass here nudging us, telling us, slow down, pay attention. You know that there's something not right here. And it's usually, it has some kind of call to action baked in. It's saying, something's not right in our personal life. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a career. Maybe something's not right in our family, in our communities, in the world at large. And it's basically saying we have a unique perspective and a unique passion. And there's something that needs our attention. And I think that we don't feel well when we ignore this. I call one chapter the body whisperer. It's like the body, it starts out gently, lovingly whispering, but eventually it shouts. I think about my patients who have a panic attack on the elevator ride up to work. It's like at that point, your body's not whispering anymore. It's shouting. And I think that when we live out of alignment in some way and we're ignoring these messages from our body, we really suffer. And it feels so terrifying to confront these truths. But what ends up happening invariably is we slow down, we say, okay, I'm paying attention, I'm listening, I'm tuning into this. And then there is some, often kind of scary truth, something that feels like, oh, this would blow up my life, or I don't have the strength, or I'm not capable of this, I'm not good enough for whatever it's being asked of me. But if we do just translate some of that anxious feeling into purposeful action, no matter how small, no matter how bite-sized that first step is, it takes away the feeling of anxiety. Now we feel fueled with purpose, and that gives us the strength to make the next incremental change. And so I encourage people to slow down and listen.
What do you think other doctors, specifically fertility doctors, should know about their patients and their anxiety?
I don't know. I remember when I was in med school and I was trying to decide whether to do psychiatry or another specialty. And I think we were on our consult liaison section of our psychiatry, rotation. And what the guy said, he was like, I'm talking to a room of med students. You guys are totipotents. Like, you can become anything at this point. And he's like, I know that not all of you are going to become psychiatrists. I'm talking to orthopedic surgeons, I'm talking to OBGYNs. He's like, but listen, all of you are going to be psychiatrists, whether or not you're going to become a psychiatrist. And I really liked that. I found that helped me make my decision because I was like, well, I'm going to be a psychiatrist anyway. Might as well have the full 45 minutes to just sit and talk with patients. But I think that I think that we sometimes think that there's like professional gatekeeping to knowing what the right thing to say is when someone is struggling. And I think that I thought maybe I had learned that information in residency, but it's really been in the 10 plus years since residency that I've stripped away that learning and just become more and more a human being in the room with my patients. And I think that if there are any physicians who are in a position where they're holding heavy stuff, they're holding space for patients going through something tough, um, just remember that you don't need special training. You don't need to say the right thing. You really need to just be your full human self in the room there and validate what someone's going through and feel it with them, witness what they're going through. That's one thing. I'd say the other piece, and this is drawing back to how I mentioned that the food piece is complex and there are a lot of pitfalls. But I do think that, especially with conditions like postpartum anxiety, for anxiety that can happen in the wake of fertility treatments, I just think that it's a big ask on the body what happens here. You know, if we grow a baby, if we are birthing a baby, if we're feeding a baby, if we're going through IVF cycle after IVF cycle, this is really draining of our resources. And people's bodies get nutritionally depleted. And I think that we're not trained to focus on that. It's considered kind of a soft science. We overlook its importance. But then people start to feel like a machine with the springs falling out and they don't feel well. They're not thinking clearly. They're not sleeping well. Their mood is all over the place. Their anxiety is through the roof. And sometimes that is their body's way of communicating, I am missing certain critical nutrients. And it's understandable. It would make sense that people get nutritionally depleted, but we just need to focus on repleting. And we need to do it in a way that doesn't drive that person crazy because it's hard to nourish ourselves in this modern food landscape. So we need to invite in help. We need to feel comfortable occasionally receiving or accepting help, or sometimes outsourcing, but figuring out how do we actually nourish ourselves when we're tired, exhausted, depleted, and to do it in a way that doesn't drive us even more crazy.
And if someone is feeling anxiety, let's say right now, or they're in a clinic and they're waiting for a doctor feeling anxiety, what recommendations and tips would you suggest for them?
Do you just clarify if they're waiting for
Or let's say if someone's experiencing anxiety right now, just in this moment, no matter what's going on. Or, the other scenario is someone sitting on an exam table waiting for the doctor to come in. What are some things that they can do actively to help themselves decrease anxiety?
Yeah, this is great. Now that you put it that way, I realize how the book is structured. The first several chapters are just prevent your body from getting tipped into anxiety in the first place. And then there's kind of more chapters around, well, it's the point of no return and you are anxious. What do we do about that? And within that, there's a lot around discharging the stress we've already taken on and cultivating the state of relaxation in the body. And so these are two different ways to kind of approach that problem, and we'll all feel drawn to different techniques. For some people, it appeals to them to discharge stress. And for that, you can exercise, you can dance, you can journal, chant, sing, make art, play with a puppy, cuddle, cry. I think that crying is such underrated, good, free medicine. We have this cultural need to rebrand crying. I think that when we start to cry, we start to apologize. We try to make it as small as possible and we say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But really, we should not apologize if we can help it and normalize crying and allow it to be bigger, not smaller. Let it be complete. A practice that I have a lot of my patients do that is super weird but very effective is a shamanic shaking practice. I learned this when I studied integrative medicine, and you basically put on drum beats and then you shake for a couple minutes. And I wouldn't love it. It's so weird, but if it weren't so effective. And the shamanic drum beats help sync up the brain waves with theta wave patterns, so it's relaxing in its own right. And then shaking seems to both excavate what gets stuck in our tissues and it seems to tell the nervous system, almost like Control Alt Delete, and tells the nervous system the threat has passed. Now I'm safe. For people that prefer to cultivate a state of relaxation, breath work is always a really nice, free, efficient technology to get you there. And the technique I usually employ is the 4-7-8 breath, where we just inhale to the count of 4, hold to the count of 7, and exhale to the count of 8. And if you do maybe 4 cycles of that, more if you have time, um, it's it's free, it's easy. And what it does is it almost tricks our sweet little gullible brains into believing that we are not anxious, just because our exhale is longer than our inhale. And that's how we would breathe if we were relaxed. And our brain is apparently gullible enough that it can be convinced that we are relaxed, even if we just breathe the way a relaxed person will breathe. And so then a whole neurohormonal cascade ensues, and it's a really nice way to tip your body out of stress. But I'll just caveat that by saying, if you're sitting on the exam table, you're in a paper gown, maybe no back support, you're nervous, you're anxious about what's coming on, and if breath work ends up being triggering, then that's countertherapeutic, and there's no need to keep going with that. You can release it at any moment. And if you just need to kind of cut it off, you can put your hands on your belly and just take what I call a cleansing breath, inhaling deeply through the nose, exhaling through the mouth with a sigh. And that can be your breathing exercise.
So what I do, and it's so, and I mean, there's nothing weird about the shamanic drums. Is that what it is? So I don't know why, but now you just explained it. So for me, when I feel a little anxious, I actually listen to electronic dance music, and it's that repetitive beat. And my husband thinks it's like the strangest thing. He's like, I don't understand how you can listen to that and feel relaxed. And I'm like, I don't know either, but it just works. And it just makes me feel happy. And then I feel better. And I just do it in little spurts, like throughout my day, not every day, but you've now explained why it works. So I think for now.
That's got me thinking. But I think it's almost can be like a weighted blanket neurologically. Like, it gives us a lot of sensory input, and that can be soothing. But also anything that gets us to move and puts us in a trance state, I think, is really helpful for our nervous system working through something.
And you just mentioned a weighted blanket. So I have always thought that my patients should have a weighted blanket at night. And do you have a recommended one that you suggest to your patients?
No, I don't have a particular brand. I am personally someone who always errs on the side of more natural materials, but basically it's not rocket science. If you find one that you find comforting and soothing, then that's your weighted blanket.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to buy one that's called a weighted blanket. There are other ways of doing it. Like for me, I have this very big, heavy pellet pillow, and I just put it on top of myself. I just lay it on top, and I just go to sleep, and it just feels so comfortable. And it's just strange, but it works.
DIY weighted blanket. Yeah. I mean, the official weighted blankets are shockingly like clinically heavy. They are.
No, they are. No, I do have an actual like clinical one, and they're not cheap either. They're pretty expensive.
Yeah. And they're really hard to launder. And yeah, I always worry about my washing machine when it's 50 pounds of beads going around.
So is there anything else you'd like to add for us today?
I think that there is something to be said for, I'm very focused on the physical body, and I play a lot of Mr. Fix-It. Like, how is the physical body out of balance? How can we nudge it gently and lovingly back into balance so you can feel well, so you can thrive in your life? But I also think that we should just recognize that we as humans have these fundamental human needs: need for community, need for connection to nature, and I think even a need for purpose, meaning in our lives. I think especially if we're undergoing the psychospiritual journey of childbearing. And this is something we weren't taught in our medical training. This was like off limits. But I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm here as a custodian of my patients' mental health. And I can't overlook the fact that their relationship to meaning and purpose in their lives has a bearing on their overall mental well-being. And it's, I'm certainly not here to proselytize. It's not like you need a particular belief system, but I think we are ready to give ourselves permission to ask the questions. And wherever we come out is fine, but we don't want to be doing ourselves a disservice and completely overlooking the questions. And so ask the questions, seek, focus, bring your head up from your mortgage at some point and look at the stars and be like, okay, also that, everything myopically we're focused on in life is true and it matters. And the cosmos are there. And that does call it all a bit into question. And community is the sort of sine qua non of overall well-being. And I think this has to do with our hardwiring. We're not the strongest species on the proverbial savanna of evolution. We were not the fastest. We were really just the ones that figured out how to cooperate effectively. And for that reason, it's in our hardwiring that when we feel a part of a group, a sense of belonging, we feel safe. And when we feel rejected or on the outside or just isolated, which is a part of modern life, we feel uneasy on some very deep level. And so, especially as we're at this phase of a pandemic and we've had even additional barriers put up to social connection, can we figure out a way that's safe, that's responsible, that feels good, that's appropriate for what we like to do socially? It doesn't always have to be hang out in big groups or go to a bar, but to connect with the people that we care about in a way that feels good to us and to make sure that we're prioritizing that.
And is your book, have you recorded your book as an audiobook?
It's narrated by a professional narrator, which I was bummed about initially, but then now that I've listened to it, I'm like, well, she does a really good job.
Good. So I want to make sure that people know that they can get your book as an audiobook as well and also read it. So tell us more if someone wants to work with you or read your book. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm not currently taking new patients for individual therapy, but I am starting at least the brainstorming process of how to make this approach a little bit more affordable, accessible. So I think online groups, something along those lines is coming down the pipeline. And I'm pretty active on Instagram. So I'm at Ellen Vora MD, and then my website is ellenvora.com.
Well, thank you, Ellen. Thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing all your wisdom with us. And I hope to see the update about your groups so my patients can join in and learn some more from you. So thank you so much.
Amy, truly, thanks for having me on, and thank you for doing the important work that you do.